Hey guys, real quick, if you need a recap of Severance Season 1, I've got you covered. Just hit the tab in the right-hand corner, and it'll take you right to it. Now, Season 2 picks up kind of where Season 1 left off. Mark arrives in the elevator, ready for work at Lumen, and as soon as the doors open, he takes off running, because he's trying to find his team. Unfortunately, there's no sign of Dylan, or Helly, or Irving, or anybody, and every time he turns down a different corridor, it just looks a little bit different, because it's pretty clear that Lumen changed things up. At this point, Mark is kind of confused and trying to figure out what exactly is going on when he finds his way back to his office. The same room that he used to share with his team, but his team isn't there. They've been replaced. You've got one chatty fella named Mark W. who asks Mark S. if he's willing to change his name. Mark is not willing to change his name. Then you've got Gwendolyn, who's also pretty chatty. And then you've got a guy who speaks broken English because he's Italian. We don't know what his name is, but these three are definitely not Mark's team. All of them have worked at Lumen for a little bit. They've just been transferred to Mark S.'s department. And as Mark S. is trying to make heads or tails of who these people are, Mr. Milkchick walks in with a bunch of blue balloons that are emblazoned with Mark's face. Milkchick asks Mark if he'll join him in his office, and as they're walking towards it, Mark is just peppering him with a bunch of questions on where his team is, but Milkchick isn't really answering it. He's just saying, let's just wait till I tell you everything that happened. As they're walking into Milkchick's office, Mark gets to meet the new Miss Casey. It's a girl named Miss Wong, and I truly mean it is a girl. She's maybe 12 years old. Mark does ask what's the deal with the kid, but Milkchick doesn't answer it. Milkchick instead decides to debrief Mark on everything he's missed in the past 5 months. Miss Cobell is gone. She's no longer with Lumen, and now Mr. Milkchick is in charge. They're literally standing in Miss Cobell's old office. As for his team, they just decided not to come back. He tells Mark that Helly and Irving both make contact with the outside, and once Dylan's Audi found out about the conditions inside Lumen, he decided to pull the plug as well. Essentially, none of the Audis decided to return their innies to Lumen, except Mark's. When the four of them did what they did, it became national news. They became the face of Severance reform. Since that happened, though, Milkchick and the rest of Lumen have made strides to make the conditions better for those that work inside and those that are severed. Milkchick especially feels bad about locking them inside like animals. He does, however, put a lot of the blame on Miss Cobell, and he mentions how Miss Cobell was at Mark's Audi's house. Their theory is that Miss Cobell developed an erotic fixation with Mark. Still, all Mark cares about is where his team is. And when Milkchick says they're not coming back, Mark wants to hear it from them, which Milkchick says, that's not possible. So we're going to need you to get back to work. And Mark is forced to take his balloons and head back to the office with these 3 random people that he doesn't really want to work with. You've got Mark W. who won't shut up. You've got Gwendolyn who keeps peppering Mark about questions regarding the outside. And then you've got the Italian. He really just wants pencils and pens. Because this is a new team, though, they need to do the team building, and Miss Wong walks in and they decide to play the ball game. Turns out it's Miss Wong's first day. That's her fun fact. And for Mark W., his fun fact is he used to work with Gwendolyn. Even though you can tell that Mark probably does want to do a quote-unquote fun fact about how he doesn't want to be there, instead he decides to look on the brighter side and says, well, I made 4 new friends, which Miss Wong quickly corrects and says, I'm not your friend, I am management. That about wraps up the day, and when Mark returns to work the next day, it's much of the same. Gwendolyn and Mark W. keep talking, and Mark is just trying to figure out how the hell he got into this predicament, but he's quickly trying to figure out a way to get out of it. He develops a plan to write a letter to an Audi, but it's not his Audi, it's Mark W.'s. He writes this note pretending to be Mark W., knowing full well that when Mark W. gets in the elevator, the note will get flagged, and it might get Mark W. kicked off the team. The plan, however, does not work. When Mark returns to work the next day, Milkchick did in fact find the letter on Mark W.'s person, but he knows that Mark W. didn't write it. Hell, it's even in Mark's handwriting. And even though Mark denies it, Milkchick and the rest of the team know what Mark did. Eventually, though, Mark caves, and he tells Milkchick, I don't know this team, and I want my team. What part of that don't you understand? To which Milkchick grabs the supervisor badge off of Mark's body, and he gives it to Mark W., making Mark W. in charge of the team. This is going to be pretty awkward, considering now the team hates him, but it turns out this was all part of Mark's plan. It was a diversion. Because while Milkchick was so busy with this note that he found, he missed that Mark had done something to the kitchenette. And when Milchick runs to find out what it is, Mark takes off for Milchick's office. He finds the intercom that Cobell and Milchick used to talk to the board with. And knowing he doesn't have much time, he quickly gets to the point and says, "I need my team back." The last thing he's able to say before Milchick pulls the plug is, "They're my friends, you can't just make them disappear." But it seems like that's kind of what happened. This little stunt really pisses Milchick off. It's usually around this time where Mark would be sent to the break room, but instead, Milchick just walks him to the elevator and says, "Goodbye, Mark S." And Mark doesn't know if he's getting fired or not, but he arrives back the next day, albeit on a completely different floor. And as he's trying to figure out exactly where he is, another elevator opens, and it's Dylan. Mark quickly tries to fill Dylan in on the fact that he's been back for a couple days, the team's kind of been replaced, Cobell is out, Milchick's in. And you got to remember, even though it's been 5 months, to Dylan, the last memory he has of Lumen is being tackled by Milchick in the room. As the two are talking, another elevator door opens and it's Irving. Unlike Dylan, though, Irving's not nearly as talkative. He just kind of walks off. And then the final person to arrive is Helly, who gives Mark a big hug. As the four of them are trying to gather information from one another, Miss Wong walks in, taking everybody by surprise because once again she's a child, and she lets them know that Mr. Milchick is waiting for them in the break room, which everybody gets concerned about. But Lumen actually has made strides. The break room's completely different. Inside, you still have a projector, but it's a very welcoming scene. And what Milchick wants to show them is a video that every new employee is going to see. You got kind of the history of Lumen, and then you've got the story of them, their uprising, if you will. And the video finishes up with the strides that Lumen has made to make it better for those that are severed. I mean, you've got new snacks like fruit leather and salsa. You've also got new incentives like hall passes and pineapple bobbing. And then you've got a new fun mirror room. At the end of it, Milchick tells them that even though they've had their differences, he respects all of them. And by the end of the day, they'll be able to choose whether they want to remain and work at Lumen or not. Not their Audi, they'll get to choose. Milchick then takes off, but he does let them know that the break room has no cameras, no microphones. He's not listening in, so he's going to let them talk about the situation. The first thing they do, though, is not to discuss whether they're going to stay or leave. They discuss what they saw out there. Mark tells the group that he actually knows Rick and Hale. And while that comes as a huge shock, especially to Dylan, the big thing was that Miss Cobell was also there. But the biggest thing he found out on the outside was the discovery that Miss Casey is actually his wife. And that even though on the outside everybody thinks she's dead, she's clearly not. Unfortunately, though, he already went looking for her, and Wellness appears to be gone. But the team is still pretty convinced that Miss Casey still has to be somewhere in the building. Then it comes to Helly's turn to tell the group what she saw on the outside, but she doesn't reveal her true identity. She just says, "Yeah, I was just inside an apartment. It was pretty boring." The story, though, doesn't really add up with Irving. He already starts poking holes in it. But then it's time for Irving to tell the group what he saw, and he's clearly shook by whatever happened up there, and he tells the group it's not our world. That's what I saw. He gets so upset that he walks out, to which Dylan chases after him. That leaves both Mark and Helly, and it's a little bit awkward because they clearly had a thing going on, and Mark just told everybody that his wife is also working at Lumen, so he clears the air and says, "Hey, me and Miss Casey never had anything going on." But because he knows that Miss Casey is his wife on the outside, he feels that he has to get her out of there. As for Helly, she feels like she doesn't really owe the Audis anything, but Miss Casey's one of them, so she also wants to help out and find Miss Casey down there, meaning she's going to stay as well. As for the other two, when Dylan finally catches up to Irving, Irving tells him, "I failed. I didn't do the objective. I went and found Bert. And it turns out he's married, or at least he's got somebody and he's happy." It seems like Irving is leaning towards leaving. And before he does, he gives Dylan a big hug, but then he starts whispering in his ear, as to not be heard by any potential microphones, that he woke up in his apartment and he was standing in front of an easel, and his Audi had painted the same thing over and over and over again. There's a black hallway with an elevator pointing down. He has no idea why his Audi did this, but he wanted to let somebody know before he left. He then tries to leave, but Dylan doesn't let him. He says, "Look, man, I'm sorry that Audi Bert has a husband, but you didn't fall for Audi Bert. You fell for any Bert." They go back and forth on whether or not Irving wants to live with the pain, not having Bert. Dylan trying to convince him to stay because, as Dylan puts it, "I need you here." But during the discussion, Miss Wong comes over and tells Dylan, "Mr. Milchick wants to see you." He has to leave Irving in the hallway, and when he gets to Milchick's office, Milchick wanted to show him something. It turns out that Dylan is the only one who has children on the outside. So Milchick tells him that his wife on the outside is named Gretchen. And then he shows him blueprints for a new renovation called the Audi Family Visitation Suite. It would essentially allow the innie to meet those that are close to the Audi. It's just more incentive for Dylan to stay, but Milchick tells him, please don't tell the others. I don't really want them to turn against you. Dylan then returns to the office where Mark and Helly are waiting. He's staying. And then about a minute later, Irving shuffles in. The group is back together. They're all staying. In episode 2, you get a look at what happened right after the switch was flipped, and the innies went back to being outies. Helly's father was not happy at all. He walked in and called her a fetid moppet, which I will be adding to my lexicon, and then he promptly walked out. But Helly knew she needed to start doing damage control. She needed to find out where these other innies were, who they talked to, and she also had to record a message knowing full well that this story might get out. So she did that. She explained that she had a few too many drinks at the party. She told a joke that she thought was funny, but people took it too seriously, and that was really it. It was nothing more than a joke that people thought was real. She put Milchick in charge of finding out who Mark and Irving talked to, and she also put him in charge of deciding whether or not they still had jobs. She also wanted to take the time to thank Miss Cobell for her loyalty. She knew that she didn't have to do that, especially after the way Miss Cobell was recently treated. So Audi Helly says, hey, I apologize. My father apologizes. The board apologizes. We really appreciate what you did. Cobell at this point, thinking that she's going to get her job back, starts game planning on how to fix this situation. She wants to interview people, but Helly cuts her off and says, we had something else in mind. We were thinking about a promotion. Severance Advisory Council. It's a brand new initiative, and you would be spearheading its initiative. Cobell isn't interested in that, though. She wants to run this severed floor, and Helly has to tell her, Mr. Milchick's running that now. This is the offer we have. Cobell tells her, I'll think it over. She's not happy about it. And then what looks to be the director of security, maybe, a guy named Mr. Drummond, escorts Cobell out. Meanwhile, around town, Milchick headed to Irving's, where Irving told him, nothing really out of the norm happened. What is this all about? Milchick, however, doesn't answer the question. He seems to believe what Audi Irving is saying, and then he tells him, your innie was involved in a physical altercation at Lumen, and thus we have to let you go. He does the exact same thing to Dylan. He fires him. So that whole story about the Audis getting outraged, that was a lie. And it doesn't even seem like their uprising was that big of a deal. But while he fired Irving and he fired Dylan, he didn't fire Mark. Before Milchick arrived, Mark, Devin, and Rickon were trying to figure out what he meant when he said she's alive. Rickon feeling like he just meant the baby. Devin, though, she's not so sure. The fact that he was holding a picture of he and his wife, that's what Devin can't quite figure out. And the fact that he'd been acting weird all night. They also can't quite figure out the whole Miss Selvig / Miss Cobell thing, and that's when Milchick shows up. Now, it's worth mentioning, everybody knows that that was Mark's innie. That's not a question. But unlike the other conversations, when Milchick shows up, he answers questions. He doesn't just fire Mark. And he's pretty honest. He explains that what happened tonight is called the overtime contingency. Milchick explains exactly what that is, why they would use it, and when Mark asks, why didn't I know about this? Milchick lets him know, it is in the forms that you signed when you joined Lumen. While Mark doesn't seem all that upset about it, Devin certainly is. She tells Milchick that she spoke with any Mark, and when Milchick says, well, what did he say? Don't worry, there are no punishments at Lumen. You can tell she doesn't buy that at all. She's also pissed off about the fact that Cobell came using a fake name and then seemed to kidnap their baby but left the baby behind. Milchick chalks that up to Cobell just being, quote, severely unwell. He kind of chalks up the innie's problems with what was going on with Cobell. And he assures everybody she's never touching that floor again, don't worry. Milchick then starts poking around for any answers on maybe what innie Mark did, but they don't feel like giving it to him. And Milchick says, okay, I'll circle back. I really hope to see you at work Monday, which Audi Mark is not so sure about. When Mark does get home later that night, he does head over to Cobell's, but she's not there. Next day, he wakes up to a text from his sister saying, "Hey, last night was weird. Can I buy you some food?" Head to the diner. And they head to Pip's. She asks him, maybe there's a way we can confirm what your innie meant? I know we're not supposed to contact him, but I know a lawyer and you can petition. And he cuts her off and says, "I'm quitting." It's pretty clear that what happened with Mark's innie isn't bothering Outie Mark at all, but it is bothering Devin. She wants to confirm exactly what innie Mark meant. And Outie Mark tells her, "You realize I confirmed my wife's body, right? Like I saw it." But this ends up sparking a big argument between the two that has Mark end up walking out of the diner. As for his team, Dylan started going on job interviews unsuccessfully. Irving, he was a little more interesting. He heads to a payphone. Yes, a payphone. They exist in this area. He calls somebody who we don't know, and we hear Irving say, "Okay, you're not picking up. Well, I just want to let you know, my innie got the message." And then he hangs up. But what Irving didn't notice was that Outie Bert had pulled up and was watching him. As for Mark, later that night, he's in his house when he gets a knock at the door, and it's Milchick with a fruit basket, there to kiss Mark's ass and ask him to come back to work. He's not just coercing him back to work with fruit, though. It's a pay raise, it's incentives. And then there's the big one. He reminds him why he got severed in the first place. Because without Gemma, every day felt like a year. This is enough to convince Mark to go back to work. And Helly, who is watching from the boardroom, watches Outie Mark walk in. At this point, she's seen surveillance tape. She knows that her innie was hooking up with innie Mark. She's not alone in the room, though. You've got Milchick, you've got Mr. Drummond, and then you've got another woman named Natalie, and they're all going over the process on who exactly is replacing Mark's team. Drummond is a little concerned about the team that Milchick was able to put together, but Milchick reminds him, "Dude, this was last-minute notice for me. I didn't really have much to work with. Hopefully this group gels well together." And what Helly reminds the group of is that they don't really care about chemistry, about the team, any of that. What they need is Mark S. to go back to work long enough to complete something called Cold Harbor. And it's because of the fact that they need Mark S. for this Cold Harbor project that when any Mark made his plea to get his team back, the board folded. You can kind of tell that Helly doesn't want to go back, but she's forced to. One by one, the team gets brought back, and any Mark is happy. Outie Mark is none the wiser. But one specific night when Outie Mark gets back from work, he notices that Miss Cobell is outside. She's packing up, getting ready to leave, and Mark has some questions. She refuses to answer any questions. She just gets in her car to leave, and Mark stops her and says, "What is this all about?" Cobell doesn't answer. She just stares at Mark, waiting for him to move, gripping the steering wheel. And that's when Mark asks, "Do you know something about Gemma?" And you can see from Cobell's face that she knows something. That was a question she wasn't expecting, and she doesn't say no. Instead, she waits and waits and waits until finally honks the horn at him and then zips around him and leaves. In episode 3, we'll start out with what's going on inside of Lumen. Now that the group has hall passes, they're able to go around the building when they want to, which will make it a lot easier to find Miss Casey. Using an Irving sketch of Miss Casey, they print out a bunch of flyers that say missing, and they're planning on breaking up into groups, with Mark and Helly going to find the goat people, Irving going to his old stomping ground of O&D, which he's not all that comfortable about just because Bert isn't there. And while they want Dylan to go check out the new break room, he's in work mode because of his incentive on meeting his Outie's family. It's not like he doesn't want to help, but he kind of brushes them aside and says, "I'll try to do it later." So for the moment, it's really just going to be Irving, Helly, and Mark. Helly and Mark take off because it's going to be difficult for them to find the goat people. Irving, however, stops at Dylan's desk and he tells him that he's recreated the painting that his Outie just kept painting over and over again of that hallway. He asks Dylan if he wants to go help him try to find it because he figures that it's probably in the building, but Dylan once again makes up an excuse. He tells him, no, you go by yourself. And then their conversation gets broken up by Mrs. Wong, who's actually shown up to reward Dylan for his hard work. While Irving, Mark, and Helly are after Miss Casey, Dylan gets taken to the new room and he gets to meet his Outie's wife. The room is really nice. It takes Dylan completely off guard because there's just a bunch of family photos of people that he doesn't know, but he knows that they're technically his family. Mrs. Wong then introduces him to his outies wife, Gretchen, and she tells him that through good behavior, he's earned an 18-minute visit. The interaction is a little awkward, especially when some questions arise like, hey, who is that child? And Miss Wong chimes into the intercom system and says, Miss Wong, because she's listening to the whole thing. She's making sure they're not discussing things they're not supposed to. But Gretchen is able to tell Dylan about his outie, and through this, Dylan gets a sense of who he really is. As for Irving, he heads on over to OND, and he does at least see a familiar face. It's Felicia, Bert's old coworker who he was really close with. She's relieved to see Irving. She gives him a big hug when she sees him. And even though that Irving is technically there to try to find Miss Casey, what this ends up being is the two talking about Bert. One thing Felicia says is, I never saw him nervous until one day he worked on his hair for 2 hours, and that day was because he knew he was going to see you. Because the feeling is so mutual, Irving whips out his sketchbook and he shows her that he drew Bert every single day that he didn't see him. He didn't care that his numbers struggled. But as Felicia flips through the sketchbook, she sees the latest sketch, which is the recreation of Irving's outie's painting, and she recognizes it. She says, that's the exports hall. We send a lot of shipments there. We used to go ourselves, but now they send a guy. Irving asks her, do you remember where it is? Because now he has his first lead. And then finally, over with Mark and Helly, they're able to find the goat room, but there's no goats. They do notice, though, that there is a tunnel, and they decide to crawl through that, and they find an entire room with a field. Goats all over the place. I mean, they've never seen this room before. They didn't even know it existed. And then a woman emerges who seems to run the place. Her name's Lorne. She looks very disheveled, very dirty, and she asks one simple question, are you here to kill me? Which throws Mark and Helly completely by surprise. They say, no, we're from Macro Redate Refinement. We're looking for somebody. Lorne, though, doesn't seem like she really wants to talk, and Mark and Helly continue to press on, saying, look, we don't mean you any harm. We just want to ask you a few questions. That's it. Lorne decides to give in, and she leads them over to her desk. She looks at the photo of Miss Casey, and it's clear that she does, in fact, recognize this woman, but she tells Mark and Helly, no, I don't know her. Lorne tries to kick both Mark and Helly out, telling him, look, just take the paper and go. But Mark doesn't want to go, because he can tell that Lorne knows something. So to speed things up, Lorne grabs a cowbell and starts using it. And this summons all the goats and all the workers in the area. And these workers, they don't seem normal. I mean, the one guy looks like he was busy on January 6th, if you know what I mean. They surround both Helly and Mark, and while they are both intimidated, they press on. Helly grabs the sketch of Miss Casey, and she starts showing the workers, do you know this woman? But as Helly is explaining who Miss Casey is, Lorne is saying, you guys got to stop this now. Lorne gets so upset that she stops Helly and says, we sent a courier to inform Mr. Milchick about your inquiry. To which Mark immediately says, no, you guys can't do that. They could kill her if they find out we're looking for her. Lorne screams, that's not a mammalian's problem, because I guess in this section they consider themselves something called mammalian. And Mark tells her, listen, we used to be scared of different departments too, but they just disappeared her. And if we let this happen to Miss Casey, then who's going to stop them when it happens to us? I mean, if one of your goats went missing, wouldn't you go look for it? That seems to get through to Lorne. She tells Mark that Miss Casey used to come and do her sessions in their husbandry tank. She also adds that Miss Casey had a gentle way about her. And then another one of the workers tells them that Miss Casey told him his outie excels at stargazing. And that meant a lot to him. Lorne cuts back in and tells Mark and Helly that as far as they know, Miss Casey was in fact retired. But if they think something else happened, the mammalians won't get in their way. Mark and Helly really appreciate this, and they're about to head out, but Lorne says, hey, before you go, can we see your bellies? Because there was that rumor that people from MDR had pouches to eat with, but Helly and Mark can put that rumor to bed. Now, as for what's going on the quote-unquote outside of Lumen, Milchick arrives in his office, and he's surprised because Natalie is there waiting for him. But it's not just Natalie, it's the board as well. They're able to hear what Milchick says through the speaker, but everything that they say is being relayed to Natalie so she can end up telling Milchick. It's weird. Natalie says, the board is thrilled at your ascension. They want to make sure you feel appreciated and want to know if you do, in fact, feel appreciated. To which Milchick says, I do. Natalie then tells him that the board wants him to feel connected to Lumen's history. To that end, the board is gracing him with a gift. They're re-canonicalized paintings. The paintings are all well-known paintings that Lumen employees have seen of the founder of Lumen, Kier. Well, when Milchick opens it up, it's as if he and Kier had a baby. I mean, it looks like Milchick has kind of replaced Kier. The paintings are bizarre. Milchick, however, is stunned, and it seems like stunned in a good way. Natalie tells him that she received the same gift when she got promoted. However, before he leaves for the day, he does put the paintings away, and he seems to put them in storage, but he makes sure they're in a safe space. While the paintings are safe, his job might not be. After some time, Miss Cobell decided to drive back to the Lumen campus, wait in the parking lot for Helen to walk out. And when Helen sees her, she walked up to her to have a conversation. Cobell tells her, if you want me back, you have to accommodate my demands. The first one is that MDR is hers. It's non-negotiable. She adds that Mark S. is so close to completing Cold Harbor, and she intends to finish what she started, which is why Milchick has got to go. Helen, though, doesn't seem to agree. She thinks that Miss Cobell is being a little egotistical, overestimating her contributions to everything. She reminds her that they didn't have to ask her back, to which Miss Cobell says, you didn't have a choice. Helen invites Miss Cobell inside so they can continue to talk about this. She calls up Natalie and asks, can you see if the board is available? Miss Cobell seems to agree to it, and she starts walking towards the building with Helen. But before she gets inside, something spooks her, and she turns around and walks back to her car, fleeing the parking lot in a very, very rushed manner. As for Natalie, when she received that phone call, she was leaving Devin and Rickens. She had stopped by to talk to Ricken because his book, The You Are, was a big hit on the floor. She wanted to know if he could adapt it specifically for innies. And while Ricken's excited about it, Devin's like, what's wrong with the original version? And Natalie says, nothing. There's just a certain verbiage to which innies respond more favorably to. If we just tweak it here and there, we think it could be a real game changer. Yet none of that really makes a whole lot of sense to Devin, and honestly, she doesn't really care because she has to head over to Mark's place. They've got a kind of secret mission they're doing. Mark realizes that he has to get a message to his innie. His latest brilliant idea is burning a message into his retinas. He's been able to figure out how long he has to do this for before he actually goes down in the elevator. They haven't really thought this plan out too much, but Devin has agreed to help. And while they work on a contraption to make this happen, Devin tells Mark all about the You Are, and the innie version that they're planning on doing. After working on it for a little bit, Mark decides to test it out in his car. But while he's trying to see exactly how long the image is burned, he gets startled because Sal Regavi, the woman who was able to, quote, free Petey from his innie, was standing outside of the car. And she asks him, you're really not doing what I think you're doing, right? You're not trying to burn a message into your retina. I mean, did you even think this through? How is your innie going to get a message back to you? She tells Mark that she heard about the OTC. And Mark says, yeah, my sister had a whole conversation with my innie. To which she asks, did he mention how your wife is alive by any chance? And that stuns Mark. He initially asks, who told you that? But then he just goes, is she? And Saul tells him, she was the last time I saw her. Mark is so stunned by this, he has to get out of the car just to get some air. He asks Saul, how could you not tell me? But she says, we were interrupted if you remember. Mark, I want to help you, but you have to trust me. There's only one way to get information in and out of Lumen, and that's reintegration. I'm better at it now. I can make it work now. All Mark cares about is seeing his wife. So he says, all right, yeah, let's do it. Saul ends up taking him to her workshop, hooking him up, asking him a bunch of questions, changing frequencies. But all of a sudden, the wavelengths in his brain click, And suddenly he remembers waking up on that table, just like Helly did. Only it's Petey who's saying, I wonder if you'd mind taking a brief survey. To start out, who are you? In episode 4, Irving wakes up in the middle of a frozen lake. He has no idea where he is. He's in the middle of nowhere. He's got nothing but trees and a forest landscape. He does notice a figure on the top of a mountain ridge, and it's Mark. Mark has no idea how he got there, but he says, hey, there's a path to your right. It'll bring you up to me. And while Irving's trekking up, he runs into Helly. She's wearing the same thing. Has no idea how she got there. When the both of them get up to the mountain ridge, they see Dylan. Dylan, same thing. Has no idea how he's gotten there. And they're all trying to make sense of it. Far away on another ridge is a television setup. When they get close to it, it's a TV setup with a VHS, and all you have to do is hit play. And there's Milchick. On the videotape, he explains they are in something called ORTBO, Outdoor Retreat and Team Building Occurrence. This is in response to their desire to see the outside world. They'll be able to do that now. With their Audie's blessings, for the next 2 days, they'll be able to walk around this forest that's named after Dieter Egan, who's somebody that none of them have ever heard of. Milchick knew this, so he goes on in the video to explain who Dieter Egan is. Kind of. He says if you want to know more, you'll have to look into the 4th appendix, because in his final hours of life, Keir Egan dictated a 4th appendix. It's a text of such sanctity that it's actually banned on the severed floor. This text is waiting for them in a place called Scissor Cave, and that's the same cave that Keir Egan tamed the 4 tempers for the very first time. His final warning to them is don't stray off the path. There will be help along the way, and then the videotape ends. And when they look over to where they previously were, there's Mark, or at least it looks like Mark. He's wearing Mark's outfit if he were to work in Lumen, and he's just pointing. They remember what Milchick said about help along the way. They figured that this is the help, so they follow where Mark is pointing, and they just start walking. And after a while, they see Helly in her Lumen outfit. She's standing in front of a cave, so they figure this must be Scissor Cave, and they all venture in. Once inside, they find a giant leather-bound book with the Roman numeral 4 emblazoned on the front cover. And when Helly opens it up, it says, For Dieter. She opens it up to reveal chapter 1, and she starts reading aloud. And it turns out that Dieter Egan was Keir Egan's twin in the womb. Once they got to be teenagers, Dieter convinced Keir to go into the woods and live as like a nomad. Keir, not wanting to let his brother down, ventured into the woods, and they went towards a place called Woe's Hollow. The next page is a map towards Woe's Hollow. So they start following it, but as they're doing so, Irving is taken over as the narrator for this story. It seems like Dieter got way too into the woods. Like way too into the woods. But once they finish up the chapter, there's Lumen's Dylan pointing in a direction, so they follow that. After a while, though, they're all pretty tired. They decide to take a break, and Mark decides to take a break with Helly. Starts asking her if she's okay. It's innocent conversation, but it's something that Irving notices. Because Irving hasn't been sure about Helly since she returned. That whole story about night gardeners has just eaten at him. It's stuck with him. He doesn't believe it. Once they continue on with the journey, Irving gets Mark alone and he says, look, I don't trust her. I think she's lying about what her Audi saw. And Mark, who is way too trusting of Helly because he really likes her, kind of just brushes Irving aside and says, yeah, that dude, you're overthinking it. The conversation, though, comes to a halt when they come across a dead animal. They don't know what it is. They think maybe it's a seal, but it looks really weird. And considering they've never seen a dead animal, Mark just says maybe this is what they look like when they die? A stressed out Irving says we should eat it. And Dylan says, what are you talking about? No. But Irving makes a good point. We don't know if there's food at the Hollow. And this starts an argument between Mark and Irving and Dylan about what to do. Eventually they agree, we're just going to head on over to the Hollow. They do seem to arrive when they see all of their Lumen avatars standing over a waterfall. Milchick is waiting for them, dripped out in white, looking immaculate. Milchick explains that they've reached Woe's Hollow. They've followed the path of Keir and Dieter, and they're actually standing in front of the tallest waterfall in the world, which is a bold-faced lie. Milchick then leads them over to their campsite where they're going to have a grill with a bunch of meat set up by Miss Wong. And they even have marshmallows for dessert that they're going to toast over the fire. I think the biggest thing they have is 4-ply toilet paper. I mean, where do you even find that? I would say they're like one step below glamping. They then all get settled in their own tents, but as Irving is getting settled, there's a knock at his, and it's Helly. She's come bearing a gift of a snow seal that she made out of snow. They laugh about the fact that Irving wanted to eat the seal, but then Irving asks her, "What did you actually see during the overtime contingency?" And Helly looks at him and says, "I told you." Irving, not believing her, presses her on, but she just leaves the tent. That night, they eat, and while they're by the fire, Milchick reads more from this book about Dieter and Kier. The story goes on to how Dieter died. It's a wild tale about his head kind of popping, moss replacing hair, and Kier, wanting to drown out his brother's screams, just went to the waterfall. It was at the waterfall where he encountered his first temper woe. A gaunt bride, half the height of a normal woman. This bride spoke to Kier and said, "This is your doing. You suffered his wantedness, and now he's no one's brother. Only chaos is whore." It's an intense story if you just take it on face value alone. Helly does not. She starts bursting out laughing. She goes, "Guys, come on. Seriously? He turned into the forest because, he jerked. He got his jollies off and stuff. He touched himself in an inappropriate way. I don't want to get demonetized. You get the idea." Well, while Helly is cracking up at this because that's her interpretation, Milchick is not laughing. He takes every single word as gospel. He really believes this is what happened. And to punish Helly and the rest of the group for laughing about it, he tells Miss Wong, "Throw the marshmallows into the fire." Milchick is taking this way too serious. He tells the group good night and he walks off. But the group, at least most of them, are still cracking up about this. Mainly Helly and Mark. But one person who doesn't find it funny is Irving. And he says, "This isn't funny, guys. And by the way, stop making googly eyes at her." They both deny that they're making goo-goo eyes at each other, and Irving once again presses on and says, "Come on, Helly, tell us about him. Tell us about the night gardener that you saw." He goes on and on, asking for descriptions of the guy, and even Dylan's like, "Dude, what is your deal?" Eventually, Mark tells him, "Irving, it's enough." But Irving crosses the line and says, "Oh, really? It's enough? While you make love to her with your eyes, while your Audi's wife rots away?" Everybody's pretty emotional at this point, except Helly. She very calmly says, "You know what? It's fine. We all know that Irving's upset because he can't see Bert anymore. And he's lonely." And that gets Irving to stand up and walk into the forest by himself. Later on in the night, Mark goes to check on Helly to see how she's doing, and she feels bad about what she said to Irving. She knows it was mean. But Mark says, he kind of deserved it. And, I can make goo-goo eyes at anybody I want. Oh, and he definitely wants to make it at Helly. Helly seductively looks back at him and says, "I'm sorry for distracting you from looking for your wife." The sexual tension builds and builds and builds until finally, hey, they have a tent all themselves. They're adults. They have the sex, if you will. During Pillow Talk, Mark has an adorable line where he tells Helly, "I don't care who you are out there. I care who you are with me." He starts kissing Helly, but as he pulls back, all of a sudden, it looks just like his wife. When he tries to refocus, it's Helly again, but his mind is really affecting him at this point. Meanwhile, Irving, he trekked on into the woods by himself with a torch, but the torch went out, he got lost. Eventually, he just posted up shop in the dirt. When he wakes up, he feels like he's being drawn to something, so he starts walking towards it, and that something is his cubicle. You've got the 4-desk setup, just like back at Lumen. But as he starts to work on the computer, one of the walls gets pulled down, and it's Bert. Then he notices to his left that there's that half-sized woman that was mentioned in the book, just typing away. He starts to get mesmerized by the numbers and letters on the screen. They start changing shapes, and then all of a sudden, that half-sized woman screams in Irving's ear, and he wakes up. It was all a dream. At this point, it's morning, so he starts running back to camp as fast as he can. At the same time, Mark wakes up in his tent, but Helly is gone. And when Mark exits his tent, he realizes that Irving is missing too. Both Dylan and Mark ask Milchick what exactly is going on. But it actually seems like Milchick doesn't even know. And Helly had headed towards the waterfall, the quote, tallest waterfall in the world. She was just staring and admiring it when behind her, Irving showed up. Irving just gets right into it. He tells Helly, "What you said to me last night was cruel." Helly was never cruel. But Helly looks at him and says, "I'm right here." Irving ignores the comment, walking closer to Helly, and says, "So if you're not her, then who are you? Who would have the power to send their Audi to the severed floor?" Helly kind of looks down. She doesn't want to make eye contact, but eventually she does. She looks at Irving and she just says, "I'm sorry." To which Irving starts choking her and dragging her towards the waterfall while yelling for Milchick. Milchick, Dylan, and Mark, they hear this scream and they come running and they see that Irving has Helly in a very, very threatening position. And Irving yells at Milchick, "Bring her back. She's an Audi. Bring her back." Meanwhile, everybody's yelling at Irving to stop. But Irving doesn't. Instead, he just dunks Helly's head right into the water, screaming how Helly's been an Audi the whole time. Ever since she's come back, she's been different. She's a mole. And then Irving brings Helly up out of the water so she can get some air, while everybody is still begging him to stop. But Irving tells everybody, "I'm going to kill her if you don't turn her back. This isn't Helly. She's an Egan." Finally, Helly screams, "God damn it, Seth, do it." And to that, Milchick pulls out a radio from his pocket and says to whoever's on the other end, "Remove the Glasgow block now." When that happens, Helen, who was there the whole time, returns to Helly, who is very confused, and Irving starts apologizing to her. The group makes their way down to the waterbed, and Milchick is pissed. He tells Irving, "The only punishment allowed for what you just did is permanent dismissal. Your Audi will be notified about this." But this is justice for Irving. Dylan says, "Hey man, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you." And Irving, with a smile on his face, says, "It's okay. It's all okay. Just remember, hang in there." Milchick, though, tries to put a stop to it, saying, "You can't talk to any severed employee right now. You're not a part of Lumen anymore." Irving gets really close to Milchick with just kind of a shit-eating grin on his face, and a pissed-off Milchick says, "Go walk into the forest." Irving kind of gives his group one last look, and then he heads in, as Milchick makes it clear that they will wipe any mention of Irving from the database. It will be as if he never existed at Lumen. And after Milchick essentially reads Irving his rights, he grabs the walkie-talkie and he says, "Now." And then it just fades to black. In episode 5, On the Outside, there has to be some ramifications for what happened at Woe's Hollow. Natalie and Mr. Drummond meet with Helen, and they let her know, your innie has to go back in. And Helen is totally against that. She doesn't want it. She actually calls the innies animals. But Mr. Drummond lets her know that her father wants this. So whether Helen wants it or not, it's going to happen. Helly is going to return. And she does. She heads down the elevator, and when the doors open up, Helen has become Helly, and there's Miss Wong waiting for her. And Helly's got a lot of questions. Miss Wong escorts Helly to a room with both Dylan and Mark. Before they can really get into anything that happened at Woe's Hollow, Milchick walks out and brings him into their office. And right away, Helly goes, "I need to know what's going on." Dylan demanding to know where Irving is. Mark demanding to know if Helly was there to spy on them, which comes as a surprise to Helly. When Milchick starts to explain the Glasgow block, Helly gets freaked out and says, "Wait, you mean to tell me that she was down here as me?" To which Mark says, "Yeah, maybe she still is." Because both Mark and Dylan don't really believe that the Helly in front of them is the Helly they knew. They're very, very suspicious about everything at this point. Milchick goes on to explain that this was really all orchestrated by Helen Egan to find out exactly what was going on inside. He compared it to a king walking around his kingdom dressed as a normal person to find out what his parishioners think of him. That's basically what Helly was doing, and Irving had no idea about this, so in order to expose the truth, he nearly drowned her. And because of that, he's been let go. He tells him his Audi is on a cruise, but Dylan doesn't care about the Audi. He cares about Irving, his friend. He goes so far as to say, well, then Irving's dead. You guys killed him. Because to those on the inside, that's exactly what it seems like. The last thing he tells them is Irving is not coming back before escorting them to their new office, where instead of the 4 cubicles, now it's 3. Even though there's not much of a difference other than the one missing cubicle, they don't like it. They've even gone as so far as to Photoshop Irving out of the picture. When Dylan makes a snide comment about Helen Egan being a mole around them the entire time, Milchick covertly reminds him that he could lose certain privileges for speaking out. Milchick starts to break down everything they still have, which are like hall passes, some of the perks previously discussed, but then Dylan just cuts in and says, let us have a funeral. Irving is a person, and he's gone. Mark backs up Dylan, although he needs a little prodding, and Milchick agrees, okay, we'll do a funeral, but in the meantime, please continue to do your work. One of the reasons why Mark needed a little prodding is because ever since Helly returned, ever since Woe's Hollow, he hasn't been the same. I mean, it's understandable. You have sex with somebody and you find out, no, that was actually somebody completely different. When he goes to the bathroom, though, Helly follows him to talk about just the whole situation, how messed up it is, but Mark is very standoffish. Helly can't believe that Mark didn't know it was her, and he says, I don't really know who you are, I guess. Helly tries to remind Mark it's not her fault that her outie took over her innie's body, but Mark doesn't really care. A little bit later in the day, they do, in fact, have this pseudo-funeral for Irving. Milchick and Miss Wong were busy getting decorations together. Dylan gets up and tells his favorite Irving story, and they even have an Irving edible arrangement made out of a watermelon. It looks actually really good. It's not too long after the ceremony kind of ends that Mark decides, you know what, I'm just going to go back to work, which comes as a big surprise to Helly and Dylan, especially Helly. She's like, dude, Irving was your friend. Why don't you care? And Mark reminds the group he's not dead, he's just not here. This upsets Dylan so much that he asks Mark, hey, did you and Helly catch up? I mean, did you tell her that Miss Casey's your wife? And that's a big surprise to Helly. But Mark clarifies, yeah, I mean, she's my outie's wife. He walks out and Helly follows him and says, why won't you talk to me? And Mark asks, what is there to talk about? And she says, I don't know, maybe the fact that Miss Casey's your wife? I mean, what are we going to do about it? But Mark says nothing. Helly keeps prodding, and finally Mark just snaps and says, we're not going to do anything because they're smarter than us. They know everything. They know everything we're doing because Helena told them everything. It's obvious to Helly that Mark is blaming her for this, even though it wasn't her, and she once again reminds him of that. She explains that he's just going to have to trust her. Not everything in the building is a lie. And then she finally says, you know, stop being an asshole, and then she walks off. Dylan, however, was left alone with the Irving fruit in that room they were having the quasi-funeral. He looks at Watermelon Irving and says, sorry I let you down. But then before he leaves, he notices something. There's a poster that says, hang in there. And that was the last thing that Irving said to him. He gets curious and he looks behind the poster, and sure enough, Irving had left something. It's his drawing of that dark hallway with the elevator. And then it's the instructions on how to get there. And we also get a glimpse at that hallway, just like Felicia said, a guy showing up, picking up items which looked like medical instruments, and then taking them to the elevator. Dylan doesn't know quite what to make of it, but he does notice it, he processes it, and then he puts it back where he found it. Meanwhile, Milchick had left because he had his first performance review. It was going to be conducted by Mr. Drummond with Natalie as an observant. Before they walk in, Milchick asks Natalie, hey, I know you got the same paintings as I did, and I'm just wondering how you felt when you received the paintings. Milchick is tiptoeing around it, but he wants to know Natalie's true feelings on it because he had complicated feelings, but Natalie gives him nothing and escorts him into the review. Initially, he thinks it's going to be a quick review, but Mr. Drummond lets him know it's not. Now, he starts off with the good stuff, but then he gets into the bad. One of them being there's been a complaint about his vocabulary being a little too Harvard-esque. Thank God somebody said it. The biggest complaint they have, though, is the fact that he's been too soft on the employees. He's instituted things like hall passes. He took them on that retreat, which ended up with Irving choking Helly out. Milchick explains, I'm doing that because I'm not Cobell, but they don't care. His tactics clearly aren't working, and he assures them, all right, I'll tighten the leash a little bit. And he does that immediately. He finds Mark trying to leave about 10 minutes early, and he stops him. The conversation starts out passive-aggressive, but Mark is very combative. He starts giving a lot of attitude to Milchick, and finally Milchick says, let me ask you a question. Did you tell Helly that you had sex with her outie during the Orpo? It's such a statement that it throws Mark completely off, and before he can truly respond, Milchick walks out of the elevator and lets Mark go up. Now, on the outside, Irving's outie goes to the same payphone he went to before, and he calls what seems to be the same exact person. He lets him know, hey, I got fired. I think they knew what my innie was up to. Only this time, Irving notices that there is a car following him. Irving quickly hangs up the phone, and he goes up to the car and says, hey, what's your deal, man? And outie Bert rolls the window down and says, yeah, I got this weird thing where when somebody shows up at my doorstep screaming my name, I kind of want to know why. And Irving has to tell him, I don't know. Bert tells him that he got fired a couple weeks ago for having an inappropriate, erotic entanglement with another employee. He now thinks that it probably was Bert's innie. It's certainly something that Fields, his husband, thinks. Irving apologizes, and then Bert invites him over. He and his husband are going to have dinner the next night, and he decides, all right, well, pop on by and we'll chat about it. Hello, threesome. Then over with Devin, Rickon is working on his book for Lumen. He's changed a lot of it, and as Devin is reading it, she tells him, this isn't even close to your book. And Rickon tries to defend himself, but to Devin, there is no defense. He's now working for the dark side. Rickon actually grows a set and pushes back, saying, hey, they're paying me a lot of money to do this. It's going to be huge exposure for me as a writer, and I'm going to sell a ton of books. Need I remind you that selling all these books is giving us a pretty good life? And Devin basically tells him to pound sand and walks out. Over with Mark, though, Sal has basically moved in. She feels like she has to, just in case Lumen is watching. But Mark wants to keep going. He only had that one blip of a memory of what happened on the inside. He hasn't had anything since. And he tells Sal that, and Sal says, well, maybe your innie actually has had some memories, which is the case. Innie Mark has had some flashes here and there. Later on that night, though, as he walks in the garage, he sees Saul going through a bunch of his wife's things. And she says, yeah, I need something to re-jog your memory. Mark does ask Saul, who exactly is in the urn? And Sal says, well, they know people. They know people at the morgue. But then Mark starts coughing. He's been definitely having some health complications since initially going through the process. Nothing major yet, but enough of an issue where Sal asks him, are you feeling all right? And Mark just brushes it aside and says, okay, well, yeah, no, I'm fine. When are we continuing? And Sal tells him one more day, that's usually for the best. Right before he leaves, Mark asks her, are they hurting her in there? And Sal tells him, I have no idea. He turns around to walk back up the steps, but then he starts hearing his wife's voice. Only it's not his wife, it's Miss Casey, doing that whole practice where she tells the innies all about their outie. Of course, Mark doesn't know this because he doesn't know that that's what his wife was doing on the inside. But then suddenly, as he's standing on the steps become Lumen. His wife's voice starts getting louder and louder. He starts walking down a Lumen hallway. And then when he opens a door, there's another hallway, and there is his wife. She's staring right at him, and she says, your outie is going to, and then he blips back. In episode 6, when Mark snaps out of it, he is visibly distraught. He's asking Saul a bunch of questions, trying to make sense of what he just saw. In order to kind of comfort him, Saul says, the Gemma that you know is in there. You just got to get her out. Once Mark is feeling a little bit better, Saul continues to do the integration process. And once she hooks Mark up, he does start connecting with his innie. It gets to the point where Saul asks him, are you at Lumen or are you with me? Mark tells her, I don't know. And she asks him, do you remember a hallway, a black hallway? Well, Mark tries to remember exactly what he did remember. The only thing he can remember, though, is a desk, and Saul thinks this is a good thing. It's a more recent crossover memory. Mark, though, is getting visibly frustrated. He wants to know when it'll all come together. Saul tells him that they need to speed up this process, which is going to involve a medical procedure in Mark's basement involving his brain. That's a little too far for Mark. So he just rips off all the medical equipment and tells Saul, yeah, I'm not doing it, and leaves. One of the side effects of all of this is the fact that you're going to be hungry, so Mark goes and has dinner by himself. But then he's approached by Helena Egan. She makes it seem like the two just happen to run into each other, but you get the sense that this was no accident. Helena introduces herself and then apologizes for the overtime contingency plan. They start making small talk, flirting a little bit. The conversation seems to be going well until Helena messes up Gemma's name. After that, it gets a little bit awkward. Mark has one of his coughing fits, and he just says, you know what, I think it's time that I go. But as he stands up and he goes to leave, he just starts staring at Helena, and something spooks him. He races home, and he tells Saul, all right, hook me up again. I'm sorry for what I did before, but yeah, all right, we need to push. The process is literally going to involve opening up Mark's skull, finding the chip, and surrounding it with a liquid to enhance the process. Saul is able to do it, but it's obviously risky. After stitching him up, Saul tells him, stay still, do not move. But Mark doesn't listen, because there's a knock at his door, and it's Devin. He feels like he has to answer it because his car's in the driveway. She knows he's home, so he staggers upstairs to answer the door. And as she's just making conversation, his head starts pounding. He starts getting flashbacks of being with Helena, but also being with his wife. The pain is excruciating, until finally, he just collapses on the ground. He's convulsing, he's having seizures. Devin doesn't know what to do, and Saul rushes upstairs, to Devin's surprise, and says, don't touch him. As for Irving, he went over to Bert's place. He ended up meeting Bert's husband, Fields, and they had a nice dinner. They talked about Bert's involvement with Lumen, and why Bert got involved with Lumen in the first place. It had to do with heaven. He didn't think that he would be able to get in on his own, but the innie might. The conversation, though, does get a bit awkward when they start talking about Fields and Bert's relationship. Bert recalled something that happened 10 years ago, but Fields says no, it was 20. We were with your Lumen partner. And why that's weird is because, as Irving points out, the first severed office opened 12 years ago. He asks for clarification, and Bert says, no, you're right. And then Bert turns to Fields and says, maybe that's enough of that. Don't mention it. So Bert's clearly hiding something. And then the conversation gets really awkward when Fields brings up the fact that Bert was fired for having a sexual relationship with another coworker, and that coworker is literally sitting at the table right now. The conversation is pretty upsetting for Fields, so when the night wraps up and Irving goes to leave, he asks Bert, is Fields okay? And Bert tells him, yeah, he just gets fuzzy, like saying that I worked at Lumen 20 years ago when it was 10. Irving, though, tells him he had a good time, and he says, we should do it again sometime. To which Bert asks, with Fields or without? And Irving says, either way, and then he heads home. But what he didn't know was that somebody was at his apartment during the entire dinner party. It was Mr. Drummond. He let himself in using his own key, and then he went to the trunk full of a bunch of information regarding Lumen employees, and he started scouring over it. Now, while all that was going on inside Lumen, Innie Dillon tells both Helly and Mark about what he found behind the poster. They ask him, why didn't you just take it? Why'd you leave it there? And Dillon says, I don't want to get in trouble right now. And that's probably because he has another date with his Audi's wife. Helly says, you know what, fine, I'll go get it, and Dillon takes off. But as Mark is looking through the fridge, he starts having a memory with his Audi, and he doesn't know what's going on. He snaps out of it pretty quick, but he wants to have a private conversation with Helly, so they head to the bathroom. They get in a stall, and Mark starts telling her about how Milchick kind of threatened him. Helly thinks it's because they want to split the two. Divide, knowing full well what would happen if the two worked together. And Helly says, I'm going to go get that map. But before she leaves, Mark tells her, hey, we slept together. At least, I thought it was you. In reality, it was your Audi. This news is really upsetting to Helly. She's trying to process it in her own way, all the while Mark is apologizing, saying, I thought it was you. She just kind of feels used. While Helly was just trying to wrap her brain around the fact that her and Mark kind of slept together, Dillon did go to that meeting with his Audi's wife. Gretchen continues to tell Dillon all about what his Audi is like on the outside, and Innie Dillon really takes to Gretchen. He wants to be with her all the time. It gets to the point where when the meeting is over, they end up kissing. I mean, like, actually kissing. And when Gretchen gets home that night and Audi Dillon asks her, hey, how was the meeting? She lies and says, it got canceled. Back over with Helly, though, after finally processing what happened, she decides, you know what, I want my own memory. And she tracks down Mark and she explains, she used me in the process. She has that memory and I don't, so I want it. And Mark is all about that. I mean, sex again? That sounds cool. So the two go off and find an empty office and they make a sort of makeshift tent. And then they do the thing. They do the sex thing. As they're walking back to their actual office, they're like two giddy schoolchildren. They start kissing in the hallway, but then Helly notices that Mark is bleeding out of the nose. This kind of came out of nowhere, so they have to go to the nurse, which just happens to be Miss Wong. She starts doing the typical questions. How did it happen? They don't know. And then she asks them, what symptoms have you had? Have you had, like, hallucinations? And even though Mark has had hallucinations, he tells her, no, I haven't. And being there in the room with Miss Wong, that was the memory that Outie Mark had had. Miss Wong, by the way, had one hell of a day. It started with a meeting with Milchick. He has a pretty good idea of who complained about his vocabulary. He thinks it was Miss Wong. She was also really interested in how his performance review was going to go. And she even goes so far as to ask once again, but he doesn't tell her. Instead, he reminds her that she can't graduate from the fellowship until he's deemed her wintertime material. This will mean using her time well, focusing on her duties, and eradicating childish follies. Yeah, he really got the message about the whole vocabulary thing. But then he puts her in charge of the floor because he wants to go work on the things that were in his performance review. The first thing he works on is putting paper clips on paper. It was one of the complaints. And then he does end up working on the vocabulary. But Seth Milchick's entire demeanor has completely changed. In episode 7, Ragavi immediately starts to work on Mark, trying to have him regain consciousness. After examining him for a bit, she tells Devin he'll be okay. I mean, there might be some deficits, but hopefully nothing long term. And Devin asks her, are you a doctor? She then tells her that Mark's going to sleep for a while. Hard to say how long, but she's going to need to grab some equipment from downstairs, which is really puzzling to Devin. Devin still doesn't know who Ragavi is. She doesn't know if Ragavi's a doctor, and she certainly doesn't know why Ragavi has equipment in Mark's basement. Devin has a lot of questions, and Sal tells her, your brother's reintegrating, which Devin loses it over. She says, no, he's not. Clearly, he's not. We're not going to discuss this later. It's over. And a very calm Ragavi tells her, it's what he wants. Devin snaps back. What he wants is to know whether Gemma's alive or not, and Ragavi cuts her off and says, she is. And as Sal goes and grabs the equipment, Devin processes the fact that her sister-in-law is actually alive. When morning hits, Mark is still sleeping. Sal hooked him up to an IV, and she tells Devin he's stable. It was an isolated event, and he's journeying now. There's a lull in the conversation, and Devin says, there's an innie cabin. I mean, technically it's a cottage, but it's a place where severed people become their innies. And there was this woman, and Sal cuts her off and says, it's the Demona birthing retreat. Devin stands up and says, so if we go to that cabin, maybe Mark can talk to his innie, but a very agitated Saul tells her, they're two completely different things. She picks up some of the equipment and tells her, this is how you get Gemma out, which Devin starts to push back on because she feels like all that equipment just almost killed her brother. Devin then comes up with an idea to call Harmony Cobell. Now, Saul thinks this is a horrible idea because, as she tells Devin, Harmony runs the severed floor. What are you doing? But Devin tells her, not anymore. I mean, maybe she knows how to get in the cabin. Maybe she knows what happened to Gemma. And Sal screams at her, that woman is Lumen through and through. She was raised by them. She's a soldier who will turn you over to them. We just have to resume the treatment as soon as he wakes up. But Devin feels like ultimately it's up to her because it is her brother. So when she says, I'm going to call her, Sal shakes her head and says, you know what, then I can't be here. That wasn't something that Devin was banking on. With the threat of Sal leaving, she knows that she can't handle this on her own, and she begs Sal to stay, but Sal says, no, I can't. This was your decision. But whatever you do, don't call that woman. She considers it, but then she hears Mark start to talk. It's faint. It's enough to keep Devin from calling Harmony. And hours later, Mark finally does wake up. Now, where was he the entire time? Well, he certainly was journeying, as Sal put it. He was going through his life with Gemma, from start to finish. Their first meeting at a blood donation center, them getting married, Gemma finding out she was pregnant, Gemma unfortunately having a miscarriage, small fights, and then ultimately the final night with Gemma, where she went out and she never came back. Devin asks him, Mark, where did you go? And when Mark thinks about it, all he can think of is Gemma's face. And he starts to cry. But you do find out where Gemma is. She is deep inside Lumen. And I'm talking it's Gemma. It's not Miss Casey. She's held up in a tiny, tiny apartment, all by herself. She goes through a battery of tests in the morning to make sure she's healthy and of sound mind. And then she finds out from the nurse who is administering these tests that she'll be going to 6 rooms that day. She then goes to get dressed, and it's a prearranged outfit for her, but when she sees it, she says, oh, shit. Because it seems like she knows that the itinerary for that day, well, it's not her favorite. She then gets dressed and passes a bunch of rooms that were project names. One of those rooms is Cold Harbor, but she doesn't go in there. She goes into another one, but when she steps in, she has the same reaction that Mark has and everybody else has when you go in the elevator. Although it doesn't seem like it's Miss Casey. It seems like it's another kind of innie. And this particular innie does not want to go through what she's about to go through. It seems to be a simple dentist appointment, and it's administered by a guy named Dr. Maurer. Dr. Maurer was, in fact, the person that picked up the dentist equipment and went down the black hallway with the elevator that Irving kept picturing. Gemma is forced to go through this dental procedure, and when she exits, she asks the nurse, how long was I in there? And the nurse tells her 2 hours. Gemma's every move, though, is being monitored from a control room with 4 people. And it seems like her every move since she entered Lumen has been monitored. All the progress with all these projects, her interactions with Mark. The head of all this appears to be Mr. Drummond, who meets with Dr. Maurer. They're looking over some security camera footage of Gemma walking down a hallway. And Drummond asks him, are the Severance barriers holding? To which Maurer says, yes, the technology is working. Drummond mentions how it's pretty obvious Maurer likes Gemma, to which Maurer says, yeah, I do. She's easy to like. She's fond of me too. Which Drummond finds funny. He asks him, didn't she try to break your fingers? So the whole Gemma being fond of this doctor, that's up for debate. At the end of the day, Maurer meets with Gemma and asks her, how are you feeling? Where Gemma lets him know that her mouth hurts, and he asks, what room did that to you? Gemma lets him know. She also lets him know how many rooms she visited that day. She doesn't remember anything that happened in those rooms, though. He then asks her how she felt in the hallway, if she exited any of those rooms feeling despair, fervor, gaiety. Gemma doesn't answer the question, though, pointing out that there's only been one room she hasn't been to yet, and today she noticed it had the name Cold Harbor. She then asks him, what happens when I've been in all the rooms? And he says, you will see the world again, and it will see you. She asks him, does that mean I'll see Mark? But he tells her, Mark will benefit from the world that you are siring. Kier will take away all his pain, just like Kier has taken away all your pain. A very frustrated Gemma speaks for the entire audience by asking him, can you just speak like a normal person? But he just tells her, good night, and he leaves. You get a look at some of the rooms and experiments that her innie is going through. One of them involves her being in a plane crash. The other involves her writing countless thank you cards from Christmas. And all of these experiments have Dr. Maurer in it in some way or another. As the days go on, though, the control room, i.e. Drummond and Dr. Maurer, notice that Cold Harbor is stuck at 96%. Drummond has a pretty good idea of why this is. He feels like the nosebleeds have set them back. And then he tells Maurer, you know when we're done, you're going to have to say goodbye to her, right? And Maurer confirms, yes, he is aware. And then they both say, for Kier. Much like Mark, while he's journeying, Gemma spends most of her nights just remembering the life she had with him. But she's getting increasingly sick of being stuck in this life. So one night, when Dr. Maurer comes to visit her, she decides to fight back. It doesn't initially start like that, though. She tells him, I want to go home. And he lies to her. He tells her that Mark remarried last year and he has a 1-year-old daughter. And Gemma doesn't believe it. But he sticks with this lie and tells her he's moved on. He then poses the question, maybe you've moved on in one of the rooms? And it is worth mentioning that the Christmas card room, he was pretending to be her husband. He continues on, saying, maybe you're gravitating towards one room. Maybe you've felt things about one room behind closed doors like you've never felt with Mark before. Maybe I've even seen it. That's when Gemma hits him over the head with a chair, stealing his key card and fleeing. She's chased by a nurse, but she's able to get in the elevator right before the nurse catches up to her. Unfortunately, when she goes up in that elevator, it's not Gemma. Gemma turns into Miss Casey. And when Miss Casey arrives in that long, dark hallway from the elevator, she is very confused. But she starts to make her way down, and that's when the door flies open, and it's Milchick. Miss Casey asks him, what's happening? And Milchick tells her that her Audi came in for a public art exhibition and took the wrong elevator. He then tells her to just turn around and head back the way she came. So she does that. She gets in the elevator, she heads down, and when the elevator doors open, Gemma is back, realizing that she wasn't able to escape. She's devastated, because all she wants is to be with Mark. In episode 8, we get a look at what happened with Harmony Cobell. She went back home. But she didn't just go back home for herself. She went back to where Lumen started as well. It's a very small sea town called Salt's Neck. It looks run down and extremely impoverished. Shortly after arriving into town, she starts brushing her teeth, and she gets a call from Devin, but she just lets it go to voicemail. She heads to the local town diner, the Drippy Pot Cafe. There's only 2 customers in there, an older guy probably in his 60s and an older woman probably in her 70s. And then there's the guy who actually runs the Drippy Pot. And as soon as Harmony walks in, he recognizes her. They grew up together. The guy doesn't just run a diner, though. He's also a drug dealer in the area. He peddles off some kind of liquid that people huff to just forget the pain of what's happened in this town. But this is the guy that Harmony has come to see. He's not too happy when she shows up, but she says, I need a favor. Meet me at the old mill. And the old mill is a place that they both worked, run by Lumen. Upon arriving at the mill, he says, you know how messed up it is that you had me come here? And she ignores it, just telling him, I need you to drive me to Sissy's. If they're watching the house, they're going to recognize my car. He doesn't want to do it, but now he's intrigued. And he asks, how much trouble are you in? And Harmony tells him, enough. He does ask her, why exactly would I help you out? And she says, well, we used to be old chums, colleagues. Colleagues help each other out. But you get the sense that they were more than colleagues. And he points out what we were was forced child labor. But she doesn't really have time to rehash his trauma with him. She says, are you going to help me or not? He does agree, but he lets her know that Sissy, who you have to assume is her aunt, still believes in all things Lumen, and that makes her a pariah in the town. So she kind of lives far from everybody else. In order to get to Sissy's house, Harmony has to hide in the bed of his truck, but when she arrives, Sissy opens the door and makes it clear, Harmony, you're not welcome here. But Harmony doesn't care at all. She came looking for something. Harmony storms right past Sissy and heads upstairs as Sissy yells, I don't want that huff peddler on my property. And Harmony reminds Sissy, it was you who gave him his thirst for it. Harmony, though, is trying to ignore everything that Sissy says. And it seems like every item she sees, it's bringing back a wave of memories because she has not been in this house in a long, long, long time. This was the house that she grew up in. This was also the house where her mother died. But when she tries to get into her mother's old room, it's locked. She's also noticed that all of her old things are gone. So she storms downstairs and asks Sissy, what did you do with my things? And Sissy tells her, I sold them. Harmony's pretty pissed off about this, but she probably should remember she hasn't been there in probably 40 years, so Sissy's kind of got a point with this one. Harmony then asks her, has anyone been here? And the answer is no, but then she says, has anyone telephoned you? And Sissy says, yeah, a Mr. Drummond. When Harmony asks her, what did he want? Sissy doesn't answer. She just asks her, what did you do? Harmony blows off the question. She goes and unhooks the telephone and then demands the key to her mother's room, but Sissy doesn't want to give it to her. She tells her that room stays shut until all who remember her are with Keir. They then get into a bit of an argument about what Harmony's mother's last words were. Sissy claiming that she didn't have any last words. And Harmony provoking her into a fight, saying, "Really? She didn't say anything after you pulled the tube from her throat?" Sissy slaps the crap out of her, but then she does come to her senses, and she tells Harmony there was gratitude in her eyes. She was finally free from suffering. Perhaps if she had been a believer, she would have found solace in the 9. This sparks another pissing contest where Harmony reveals that she never even got to say goodbye to her mother because she was off at school, a Lumen-run school, with Sissy reminding her that Mr. Egan saw Kier in her. Proof of this was the fact that she got the Wintertime Fellowship, and at the factory there was no student who was more industrious than her. But then she takes all that praise and throws it away by looking at Harmony and saying, "Such a disappointment you've proven to be." Harmony just demands to know what Drummond told her. But Sissy doesn't reveal that information. She simply says, "Return. Plead forgiveness. The Egans will grant it." But Harmony doesn't believe that's the case at all. She then heads upstairs and she starts frantically looking for the key to her mother's room. And it takes a bit, but she does locate it. And when she goes in, this room has not been touched since probably the 1970s. It's a lot for Harmony to take in. She starts picturing her mother dying on this bed with this feeding tube that is still up there. And Harmony, to feel close to her mom, gets in the bed, puts the feeding tube in her mouth, and just lays there for a while. Day turns to night, though, and finally the guy who brought her there comes upstairs and says, "Look, it's cold. I gotta go." And Harmony, realizing that she's wasted the entire day, not actually finding the item that she came there for, tells him, "Give me a second. I gotta think about what she would have done with this thing." While Harmony's thinking, he tells her, "I liked your mom. She hated Lumen more than I did, and that's really all I needed to know." He then decides to sit down next to her and ask her, "You want to get high?" And he pulls out that liquid that he sells people in the town, and the two huff it. After doing so, Harmony comments that she hasn't done that since she was 8 years old. It seemed like they kind of had to do it back then when they were children just to get through their shift at the factory. They then kiss, but it's fleeting. And Harmony finally realizes that Sissy wouldn't have thrown away the item she's looking for. She would have stored it somewhere. There's a little tiny cave not too far away, and the two of them head there. And sure enough, there's a bunch of items that belong to Harmony, and she starts looking for the item she came there for. She finds her old yearbook, and then she finds the James Egan bust that says, "Intertide Fellowship, Harmony Cobell," and she starts to unscrew it, because the item she's looking for was inside of that, and it's an old notebook. Now that she's got the notebook, she goes back into Sissy's house and says, "Hey, I'm going. Don't tell them I was there." And Sissy makes it clear, "I'm not lying to the Egans for you." Harmony shoots back, "You owe them no loyalty." And Sissy reminds her, there was no town before the factory. Everything that's happened in your life is because of them. This pisses off Harmony so much that she shows Sissy exactly what's in that notebook. It's all of her ideas. Ideas that she came up with on her own that eventually became the Severance Project. Overtime contingency, glass glow block, all of it was her idea in the first place. Initially, Sissy's dismissive of it, saying, "Yeah, okay, James Egan was the inventor of that." And that's because that's the story that everybody's been told, but as Sissy looks over the notebook, she realizes, no, it actually was Harmony the entire time. She asks Harmony, "Why didn't you tell anybody?" And Harmony says, "I was told that Kier's knowledge is for all, that if I sought credit, I would be banished." Sissy looks at the last page of the notebook, and then she makes a play to throw it into the fire, which Harmony quickly stops, grabbing the notebook from her hands and going to leave. Right before Harmony does, though, Sissy yells at her, "It was your mom who removed the tube, not me. Your mother's a coward." She hurls insult after insult, and Harmony screams, "I don't believe you." Sissy, though, continues, saying that she really thought that Harmony was going to be something, that she was Sissy's flower, but now she sees that Harmony is just a weed, much like her mother. Harmony would love to fire an insult back, but her ride starts honking the horn and yells, "Hey, somebody's coming, we gotta go." The guy lets Harmony take the truck so that she can get away, and as Harmony drives off, he stands in the road, waiting for who's ever coming to the house. He's ready for a battle. But shortly down the road, Harmony gets a phone call again from Devin, and this time she picks up. Devin starts to explain that Mark has been reintegrating. Harmony knows that Ragabi was behind it, and she's shocked that she hasn't killed Mark at this point. And she tells Devin, put Mark on the phone. I want to hear everything. In episode 9, it is a big day for Lumen. This is supposed to be the day where Cold Harbor is finally finished. It's at 96%. The day starts out with Helena having breakfast with her father, and then she leaves the quasi-compound to go into the office, where Milchick is already there. He's got great news for Miss Wong. This is the end of her Wintertide Fellowship. This means that she will kind of graduate. Her bed is being moved from her parents' home to a place called the Gunnel Egan Empathy Center in Svalbard, where she's going to work to steward global reforms. She's going to finish out the day, and then a shuttle is going to pick her up and take her to her new life. It's worth mentioning, she kind of looks terrified, but she does get a cool bust out of it. It's the same bust that Harmony Cobell got years earlier. But in order to truly graduate from the program, she has to make a sacrifice. And that sacrifice, Milchick has decided, will be her ring toss game, which he makes her put on the table and smash. Milchick then heads to his office where he gets a phone call from Mr. Drummond because everybody is on high alert. This is a big day. Cold Harbor's supposed to be finished. There's only one problem. Mark isn't in the office yet. Milchick's not really sure what to do other than call Mark up and hope he picks up, but he doesn't. And Milchick, Drummond, the rest of Lumen, they aren't the only ones that are worried about Mark and the fact that he's a no-show for work. So is Helly. Helly shows up for the third day in a row, and Mark is nowhere to be found. And because of the fact that he was dealing with nosebleeds, she's really concerned. So she goes to Milchick's office demanding answers. She demands to know if Mark is okay, and Milchick refuses to give her any answers and acts like this isn't a big deal. And when Helly mentions he's department chief, Milchick just says, well, Dylan's department chief in his absence. And that's when Helly really cuts Milchick to the core by saying, oh, kind of like you and Cobell. Milchick tries to reprimand her, but she says, oh, don't you mean Helly E, not Helly R? He gets really mad and reminds her that Helena Egan is his employer, she is his subordinate, and this constitutes insubordination, but Helly doesn't really care. She basically calls Milchick's bluff, knowing that he can't really do anything to her, and she walks out. Now, as for that new department head, Dylan, he once again has a meeting with Gretchen, although this time it is different. Gretchen's mood has changed. Because Gretchen told Dylan's outie about the fact that she kissed Dylan's innie. She tried to explain to the outie that Dylan's innie just reminded her of what her husband used to be. But that's not how outie Dylan took it. Outie Dylan took it as cheating. He was pissed. He told her, you can't do this anymore. You can't be going to visit me while I'm at Lumen or I'm just going to quit. It gutted Gretchen. And it also gutted innie Dylan, who had basically fallen in love with her, so much so that he made her a ring. The fact is, seeing Gretchen was really the only thing he had to look forward to, and now she's telling him it's not going to happen, it's over, this will be the last time they see one another. He tries to plead with her that he can give her the life that she wants and she should stay, but she can't do that. She leaves Dylan in the office with his finger-tracked ring. When Dylan does finally manage to get back to the office, he doesn't care about working at all. All he can focus on is Gretchen. Helly tries to pick up his spirits by saying, you could meet somebody down here, but he says all that's down here is O&D and goat people. Gretchen's my wife. And Helly reminds him that she's not his wife. She's treating him like all the outies treat them. Like they don't matter. She tries to get him back on task, reminding him that Irving was his family. And Irving left him a message, and she doesn't know what it means. But it was important enough for Irving to leave that message for Dylan, so she implores him to follow up on it. But at the moment, Dylan doesn't want to do anything. He just wants to listen to Taking Back Sundays, Tell All Your Friends, Brand News, My Favorite Weapon. Maybe mix in Just Surrenders, If These Streets Could Talk. You know what I'm talking about, Elder Emos. Dylan ends up getting up and just roaming the halls until finally he realizes he can't do it anymore. He goes into Milchick's office, and he fills out an innie resignation form. Milchick kind of tries to talk him out of doing it, really just telling him how ungrateful this whole process is, but Dylan's mind's made up. He hands over his key card, and he has to head to the elevator and just wait. Now, while all this is going on, Devin is transporting Mark to a secret location where Mark is going to meet with Cobell to figure out what their next step is. It's worth mentioning, Mark thinks this plan is terrible, but Devin reminds him he had brain surgery in his basement, so yeah, they're going to go with her plan for now. When they get to the location, they wait a while, and then eventually Cobell does show up. As soon as Cobell arrives, Devin says, hey, can you take us to this birthing cabin so we can talk to Mark's innie? And Cobell explains, there's no point of doing it during the day. We're going to have to do it at night, so we're going to have to wait. That doesn't quite sit right with Devin or Mark for that matter. And Harmony says, we don't even know if he's completed the file yet. I mean, I assume no. But if you have completed Cold Harbor, well, she's already dead. Mark loses it at that statement, pointing at Cobell saying she better be alive. Mark proclaims to both of them that they're leaving because if Gemma clearly is in this much danger, then they need to go there immediately. Devin talks Mark down, and then Cobell says, you need to call Milchick. Tell him that you're not feeling well, you'll be out today. And if he smells BS, then he's going to lock you out of the building. So, make it sound good. Mark doesn't want to do any of this. He doesn't want to follow Cobell's orders. And Devin, the entire time, is telling him, Mark, I get it, and I know what she put you through. This is our only option of getting your wife back. As Mark hems and haws on what exactly he's going to do, the guy he's supposed to call, Milchick, was having a very uncomfortable conversation with Mr. Drummond, who was essentially yelling at Milchick because of the fact that Mark was missing. And Milchick took it for a while, but then finally he reminds Drummond, hey, I'm in charge of the severed floor, which means when they're here. It's not my problem of what happens when they leave this building. I'm not in charge of them anymore. He goes so far as to tell Drummond to devour feculence, which even I didn't need a thesaurus to figure out what that meant. But the man just reached a breaking point, and he got sick of Drummond disrespecting him. So he walked off, walking back to his office, frustrated, but that is when he got the phone call from Mark. And at first, Mark did exactly what Harmony Cobell said. He just told Milchick that he wasn't feeling well, and Milchick trying to get him to come into work, saying, I'll send a car. But the whole time, Mark's like, no, I had these nosebleeds, and I went to a specialist to see what was going on with them. Although finally, Mark got sick of lying, and he just lost it and told Milchick, look, I just need a day, okay? I need a day. I'm going through stuff in my personal life. Isn't that what Lumen's all about, the work-life balance? And you actually see a human come out in Milchick, because it seems like he does understand what Mark is talking about. And instead of trying to force Mark to come into work, he just tells Mark, will you promise me that you'll be in tomorrow? And Mark says, yeah, I promise I'll be in tomorrow. So that right there does it. Finishing Cold Harbor is going to at least wait one more day. When the day ends, you've got employees ready to start a whole new chapter of their life. Miss Wong leaving for this, whatever the hell it is. Dylan getting into the elevator for what seems to be the last time. And even a former Lumen employee, Irving, is looking ahead to the next chapter. When that day started, Irving went out, and when he came back, somebody was in his apartment, and it was Bert. Now, it's no secret that Irving had been keeping tabs on all things Lumen, and he'd been keeping tabs on Bert. After their first interaction, Irving took down some notes about Bert, mainly pointing out that Bert could easily be a Lumen thug. So when Bert got into Irving's apartment and he saw that, he kind of chuckled to himself. When Irving initially wrote that, he thought that Bert was possibly connected to a bunch of disappearances, possible deaths, but after meeting him and after having dinner with him, he feels like that's not the person that Bert is. When Irving says to Bert, I know you're not with them, Bert doesn't even acknowledge it, just telling Irving, why don't you go for a ride with me? And Irving and his dog get in Bert's vehicle. As they drive off, Bert kind of confesses to Irving a little bit. He says, I never hurt anybody. I want you to know that. I drove people places. I didn't ask what happened to them once they got there. At this point, Irving's starting to think, maybe Bert is in on it. And under different circumstances, maybe it would be, but not this time. Bert drives Irving to a train station. He buys Irving a ticket, and he tells him, get on this train and go as far as you can go. I can't know where you get off. And you can never come back to Kier. But Irving doesn't understand. Yes, Bert, won't Lumen come after you? Bert explains again why he severed. He wanted to be innocent, at least part of him. And that innocent part of him fell in love with Irving's innie. Irving says, I want to remember it, because he's never been loved before. But Bert says it's probably best that we don't. They kind of go back and forth a little bit, with Irving wanting to feel the love, and Bert telling him, we're not going to be able to, and it's fine. You got to go. Irving makes one last attempt to get Bert to let him stay and try to see if they can be something, but Bert shuts it down. Irving and his dog then get on the train and they go off to their new life. But as nightfall hits, there's one person still in the building at Lumen, and that is Helly. If Dylan wasn't going to go track down that message from Irving, she was. She found it, she brought it back to her desk, and she started trying to memorize the directions on how to find this hallway. As she's doing this, all of a sudden she hears a voice from behind her say, "You tricked me." And it's her father. But because Helly is her innie, Helly has no idea who this guy is. She doesn't know that he's her father. And it's very uncomfortable. On the outside, though, Mark is able to get into the birthing retreat. Harmony Cobell sneaks him in. And as soon as he enters, it's just like when he enters Lumen. Outie Mark is no more. Innie Mark is here. Understandably, Innie Mark is a little freaked out. He's not used to this. He tries to leave, but Devin says, no, wait. If you try to leave, you're just going to come right back in. Real quick, do you remember the last thing you said to me? And Innie Mark says, yeah, she's alive. She then asks him, will you follow me? I want you to talk to somebody. And she escorts him upstairs where Harmony is waiting for him. And in the season finale, a very confused Innie Mark looks at Miss Cobell and says, what the hell is going on? What are you doing here? But she gets right to the point. She asks him, have you finished Cold Harbor yet? And he tells her, no. And she says, oh, okay, thank God. We can still save her. It means she's still alive. Now, they have to explain to Innie Mark who they're saving. To him, it's Miss Casey, and to his outie, it would be his wife, Gemma. Miss Cobell starts explaining to him where they're keeping Gemma in the building, and it jogs his memory. It sounds just like what Irving was talking about. The dark hallway, the elevator. He excitedly says, we know where she is. He's still a little confused about what his role in all this is. How is he going to find Gemma once he gets down to that floor? But they tell him, you won't. Your chip is only connected to your floor. So once you take the elevator down, it'll be your outie. But Miss Cobell makes it very clear that they're not going to let him leave MDR until that file is complete. And what is that file? Essentially, it's Gemma. It's all of her feelings, good, bad, you name it. Because what they're doing is they're making a new outie. And once it's complete, once they have all their feelings bottled up where they can just pump it into somebody else, they're going to kill her. So once he's done with that file, it is imperative that he gets his ass to that elevator and gets downstairs before the testing is complete, because when the testing's complete, Gemma's no more. After that, the outie will lead Gemma to the elevator where Innie Mark will return, and Innie Mark will lead her to the exit door. That way she'll be able to escape. Devin, realizing that this is a lot for Mark to take in, says, look, man, I know it's difficult, but if we can do this, and if we can prove that she basically was kidnapped and forced to stay down there, and they faked her death, it will end them. But that doesn't sound like a good thing to Innie Mark, because if they end Lumen, they're essentially ending him. And when he asks for clarification on that, Cobell confirms, yeah, when we end Lumen, it'll end everybody on the severed floor, which means all the Innies will cease to exist. That sounds terrifying to Innie Mark. And Devin says, you know what, there's actually somebody else that wants to talk to you. Because with a video camera, they recorded Outie Mark so that he would be able to send messages to Innie Mark. Innie Mark would watch it inside, and then he would walk out, become Outie Mark, and watch Innie Mark's response. And at first, it starts out very cordial, with Outie Mark telling Innie Mark how sorry he is. He was promised that they would be happy, and he knows that what they're asking of him is a lot, but it's worth it. He also starts to explain reintegration and promises that if they were to do this, that he would continue to do reintegration, so it wouldn't necessarily kill Innie Mark. But Innie Mark is confused about how that would even work, fearing that he would essentially be erased because there's more of Outie Mark than Innie Mark to go off of. The conversation, though, really takes a turn when Audi Mark calls Helly Heleny. He was trying to point out that, hey, I heard that you have somebody down there, and you probably can understand what I'm going through right now without my wife. I've thought about her every single day. But the fact that Audi Mark called her the wrong name to Any Mark, that doesn't sit well. Any Mark points out that he didn't even know her name because he never cared, because until tonight, he never cared because he didn't need anything from Any Mark. Eventually, Any Mark loses it and says, I don't believe you. I think as soon as you get your wife back, I disappear along with everybody down there. With these conversations going nowhere, Cobell asks Devin, let me talk to Any Mark alone. She starts off by explaining what they were doing in MDR by building an Any for somebody else through Gemma. He's completed 24 files. Cold Harbor is the last file they need. She once again gets very blunt with him, saying tomorrow is going to be your final day at Lumen. He's pretty confused and asks her, what are you doing here? I mean, why are you telling me this? And she goes, Mark, there's not going to be a honeymoon ending for you and Helly R. She's an Egan. They don't care about you. He gets furious, going to leave, saying, no, I don't believe that. I think you're using me. As Miss Cobell yells back, reintegration is your only chance. Right before he leaves, he looks at Devin and says, if you love your brother, then you better tell him that the next thing I see better be the severed floor, or I swear to God, he'll never see his wife again. And the next thing he sees is, in fact, the severed floor. When the elevator opens up, there's a new painting. You've got Mark at the center of it, and basically everybody he's interacted with around him. You would think it's like Jesus at the center of it, and the apostles surrounding him as he finishes Cold Harbor. That's essentially the painting. As he's looking at it, though, he does run into Helly R, who had a hell of a previous night. When Jane Egan snuck up on her, he started to explain to her that he used to see Kier in his daughter, but then it went away. And now he sees Kier in her. And when she tries to get tough with him, telling him that his family is going to burn in hell for what they've done, he points out, yeah, no, there's Kier in you. Tomorrow is going to be a big day. But tomorrow is now today. The two walk hand in hand down to the office where when they get there, they see a really weird mannequin of Kier Egan, and he's holding a note. The note is from Mr. Milchick congratulating Mark on the fact that he's about to finish his 25th file and that Helly will be there to monitor it and bear witness. As they sit down, though, at the desk, that's when Helly reveals to Mark about what James did the previous night and how weird it was. He then tells Helly, I know why they're doing this. Now, as he is explaining this to Helly, Mr. Milchick, who is in the building, has to welcome back somebody, and that somebody is Dylan. Dylan filled out the proper forms to get out of the program, but the Audi Dylan decided, no, bud, you're staying. Milchick brought Dylan into a room and showed him a note for the reasons of why Audi Dylan decided to keep him in the program. And then he ran the hell out because he has to go monitor Mark's situation. Essentially, the note is, hey, F you. You tried to hook up with my wife, and I understand it. She's awesome, and we are basically the same person, but that wasn't cool. It then got a little touchy-feely, though, with him bringing up how it seems like he's a really cool guy, and he hopes that one day his wife sees in him what she saw in the innie. But like it or not, Dylan's staying. Now, back in the former office, you've got Mark with this conundrum about what to do, whether to finish the file and go through the plan that they discussed in the cabin, or to not finish it at all. Helly's advice is go through with the plan. She understands that any Mark is skeptical, but what if the Audi isn't lying? And what if reintegration is the only way that he can truly survive? A very emotional Innie says, but I want to live with you. And that's when Helly says, but I'm her, Mark. He says, okay, and he starts to work on the file. And it's a big relief to everybody in Lumen. Right before he 100%s the file, Helly walks over and hands him Irving's note about how to get to the elevator. And then Mark presses the button, and the file's 100%. But as soon as he 100%s the file, the lights go out, and that mannequin of Kier starts talking to Mark, congratulating him on completing his 25th file. He explains that by doing this, it makes him one of the most important people in the company's history. And then he introduces Seth Milchick. The entire interaction between Milchick and this mannequin is awkward. It's staged like it's kind of the Oscars, heaping praise on Mark, but yeah, it gets weird. Even Milchick takes a dig at Kier, saying, your mannequin is like 3 inches taller than you actually were in real life, and then Kier calling Milchick Seth. When they finally wrap it up, a full-on marching band comes in to perform for Mark and Helly. But they both realize that this is nothing more than a distraction. They're trying to keep Mark in the building. And Mark knows he's running out of time. A few floors down, Gemma is being escorted to go through the testing. James Egan, who's in the building, is there to witness it and watch it from a computer screen. Yet, up top, Mark can't seem to escape this marching band with Milchick running point as if he's Nick Cannon in Drumline. Helly realizes that she needs to create a distraction, so she says goodbye to Mark. She runs over to Milchick, she grabs his radio, and she zips through the drum line and goes into the bathroom. And Milchick takes the bait. He follows Helly, which allows Mark to get away finally and start following Irving's directions. Helly, however, knows that she needs to trap Milchick in the bathroom. She asks the drumline for help, but they don't seem to care. Using all her might, she's just trying to hold the door, but eventually Milchick's too strong and he's able to open it. That's when Dylan comes to the rescue. He'd walked back in the office, he heard the commotion, and he traps Milchick in the bathroom using a vending machine, pushing it to the door. Milchick can't escape, no matter how hard he tries. While they're holding Milchick in the bathroom, Mark has made his way to a room and a door where he can't seem to open it. He's trying desperately, but he's causing a little bit of a commotion, which alerts the room across the hall. And that room had Mr. Drummond and Lorne, the leader of the goat people. She had shown up to offer a sacrifice of one of her goats. It seemed to be the best goat that she had available. But she did ask Drummond, how many more of these do we have to do? How many more goats do we have to kill? And he basically told her, as many as it takes. He then was prepared to kill the goat as the sacrifice, but then he heard Mark's commotion and he entered the hallway to see Mark S. trying to do whatever the hell Mark S. was trying to do. This caused a physical altercation between the two, with Mark S. getting his ass kicked pretty handily. But he was saved by Lorne. I guess that speech about losing goats and what Lorne would do if she lost her best goat, would she just give up? Well, it hit home for her. While she had to do the sacrifice, she wasn't happy about it. And she definitely wasn't pleased with Drummond's cavalier attitude to killing her goats. So as Drummond was trying to choke the life out of Mark S., Lorne snuck up behind him with the item that they were going to use to kill the goat, put it to the back of his head, and said, no more killing. However, that's when Drummond started beating the crap out of Lorne. I mean, really beating the crap out of her. But it's 2 versus 1, and Lorne unleashes all that pent-up frustration at the fact that she's had to kill her goats time and time again. Well, she unleashes it on Drummond's face. She's about to kill Drummond, but Mark actually begs her not to. The fact is, he needs Drummond. He needs Drummond to get down to the hallway where the elevator is, and Drummond escorts him there. Right before they get in the elevator, Lorne says, Emil thanks you. Emil is the name of the goat. Mark and Drummond then get in the elevator with Mark holding Drummond at gunpoint, and Mark starts to explain what they're going to do. The fact they're going to go down, they're going to find Gemma, Mark's going to turn into his Audi, all of that. And they don't have time to waste, by the way, because Gemma is about to finish up her testing assignment, if you will. But there's one slight problem. With any Mark holding the gun to Drummond's throat, once he turns into Audi Mark, as they go through the elevator process, the switch causes Audi Mark to pull the trigger, and it kills Drummond. He's bleeding all over the place. There's blood all over Mark, but he doesn't have time to dwell on it. He's got to find Gemma. So he starts running around the halls looking for Cold Harbor, and he finds it. The problem is, getting into Cold Harbor, you need to prick your finger, and when Mark does it, he doesn't have access to it. But luckily, he has Drummond's blood all over his tie. So he puts the tie over his fingertip, and when it pricks his tie, it works. It opens up the door, and there's Gemma. When Mark sees Gemma, she isn't quite sure who Mark is, because when she entered the room, she was somebody else. But as he tries to explain to her who he is, the doctor, James Egan, the people that are watching this, they're freaking out, because this was not expected. The doctor actually comes through the intercom and says, he's here to hurt you, don't listen to him. But slowly, he's able to get Gemma to put her guard down. Meanwhile, you've got the doctor who's radioing for Drummond, not realizing that he's dead, until eventually he realizes, okay, I have to go and try to stop this. Once Mark is able to convince Gemma to come out of the room of Cold Harbor, and Gemma turns into the Gemma that he knows, they give each other a big, relieved hug. But then, the alarm goes off, and they realize they have to escape. As they're trying to escape up top, Milchick is still trying to get out of the bathroom. The marching band is still playing on. Finally, Milchick tells them, return to your department. They start to leave, but that's when Helly jumps on the desk and says, no, wait. This desk used to have 4 seats, but our friend Irving is gone. And I know you guys have lost friends. If Seth Milchick gets out, we're dead. They're going to turn us off like machines. You guys could be next. I mean, they give us half a life and think we won't fight for it? Please, help us. When the alarm reaches the up top, you have 2 different reactions from Helly and from Milchick. They both know what the alarm means. Milchick starts running at full speed, trying to knock over the vending machine until he's finally able to do so. He's able to escape. He's pissed off. He looks like he's Black Panther all of a sudden, but he's also facing an army of a marching band, and they're led by Dylan, who tells him, hey, Milchick, go F yourself. Now, at this point, Mark and Gemma have made the elevator, and they're making out in it until their outies switch to the innies. And you've got Innie Mark making out with Miss Casey, who's very confused. But Innie Mark follows through the plan. He leads Miss Casey / Gemma to the exit door. He opens it up, and when Gemma steps through it, she's back to being Gemma. But when the door closes, Mark is still on the inside. She starts frantically saying, Mark, come on. But Mark S. isn't moving. He's conflicted on what to do. She's beyond confused, trying frantically to open the door, but it's locked, begging him to come through the door, but he won't. And then it gets even worse when Helly shows up. Gemma has to watch her husband's Innie walk over to Helly and leave, as she's screaming for him to come back, walk through the door so they can go home. Innie, Mark, and Helly run through the hallways of Lumen, hand in hand, and that is the end of Severance Season 2. Thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this season in the comments section. Personally, I absolutely hated it. Yeah, no, I watched every episode. Can't stand the show. But hey, you know what? I'll be back for Season 3. Be nice and go buy like a cup or a t-shirt. I also have memberships. That's cool too. Helps me stay over the poverty line. But just know, deep down, I do appreciate you guys checking this out.